Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on quality and equitable instruction for multiple modalities. My name is Judy Seipel, and I am the Senior Vice President for Accreditation Relations and Services. We want to take a minute to thank our 2024 annual conference diamond sponsor, Symbiosis, for sponsoring today's event. Symbiosis is a leading instructional design firm that has partnered with over 65 institutions globally and has developed more than 3,700 high-quality courses that are pedagogically strong and affordable. Symbiosis is a minority and women-owned business enterprise and one of America's fastest-growing private companies on the prestigious Inc. 5000 list. To learn more about Symbiosis, visit symbiosised.com. All right, now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenters, Deb Adair and Meg Benke. I'd like to ask them to introduce themselves and share a little bit of information. Deb, maybe start with you.
Sure. I'm Deb Adair. I'm the CEO of Quality Matters, and Quality Matters has been working in the field of online quality assurance since the FIPSI grant ended that began this initiative in 2006, and I started there in 2007. And so we've been working with institutions across the United States and in about 35 other countries in ensuring quality and quality assurance for digital learning.
Thank you, Deb. Meg?
Hello, everyone. I'm Meg Benke. I'm a professor at Empire State University with our EDD program, and also a Master of Arts in Adult Learning and a Master of Learning Design and Ed Tech. I'm a former provost here at Empire State University, and also I'm a former Middle States Commissioner, and I'm a former president of the Online Learning Consortium. So I look forward to talking with you all and hearing your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm also joined today by my colleague, Ryan Hartnett. Ryan, can you take just a moment to introduce yourself, please?
Hartnett. I'm Vice President for Institutional Relations here at Middle States, and I'm looking forward to the presentation today and all of your great questions. So thank you.
Very good. And I think we're going to stick with Ryan on this next slide and start the presentation.
So we would ask that you submit questions through the Q&A function through the chat. We'll be taking a look at those questions, and we'll also have some time during the presentation where we'll pause and take some of the questions that we've received. So please submit those questions as they come up. Thank you. And we'll turn it over to Deb. Want to get us started here?
Certainly. Thank you, Ryan. Both my my pleasure to be here and to be talking about my favorite topic. So I'm happy to do this. And I wanted to sort of approach this first part with this first set of slides, really from a perspective of the idea that quality and equity they go hand in hand. They're really two sides of the same coin. So the work that Quality Matters has done over the years with quality, we've looked at this as it can't be quality unless it's also equitable. So thinking about this idea of equity and especially from the perspective of equitable access to education, I thought it would be good to share a little bit about the data that we've collected through our CLOE surveys about the demand for online, how institutions are meeting it, what they're doing for quality around it, and then a little bit of some very current and emerging practices related to increasing accessibility. So if you would move to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the CLOE project is an annual survey that's really one of QM's flagship projects. And this is our 9th annual survey and was just released maybe a month ago. This is a project that we have collaborated since the beginning with EduVentures, and now more recently, EDUCAUSE has joined the project. And so this is a view of chief online learning officers in the United States and their perception about trends in online learning. So the CLOE is short for the Changing Landscape of Online Education. So if we could go to the next slide. And I'm going to go through these slides fairly quickly because the point is really, like the first two slides, really just to demonstrate the significant demand for online education and the fact that that demand has continued to grow. This was from our 2021 survey, obviously. And you can see that across these three groups, traditional undergraduates, which are in blue, adult undergraduates, which are in black, and then graduate students in green, yet across all three categories, you see that the increased interest in online is more than 20% indicated that it was much higher than in previous years. And if we go to the next slide, you see the same kind of thing in 2022. Only the question was a little different. We just really asked about increased interest, same level of interest and less interest. And of course, the orange here is increased interest. So we have been noting this pattern over time. I'm just pulling out a couple of examples. So students want the online option. Next slide, please. And so institutions are responding to that demand. And we had asked them about, what are their priorities for providing online education? And you can see in the orange, their top priorities are in creating online versions of on-campus courses and on-campus degree programs. So this is the number one focus for how they're meeting this. So they're meeting the demand based on where their expertise is now. So next slide, please. And then the reason that their institutions give us for this approach is they're trying to increase enrollment. Obviously, this is sort of a mandate across the board that we're looking to increase enrollment, but also to meet student demand. So those are the two major drivers behind offering the online courses and programs. So even the option, even the first option, allowing institutions to pursue students within the region, and the one about pursuing students outside our region, it makes sense for institutions to pursue enrollment, but it's also an opportunity to extend and expand access for students who might not otherwise have an opportunity to attend college. So, these are very strong indicators. And then the third one here from the top, campus-based students are asking for online options. And even the one under it, online courses, sections tend to fill up first. These are all, again, indicators that students are looking for this increased flexibility and other affordances of online, and institutions are trying to step up to that. Next slide. So access is part of the equity context, but it isn't the only thing. So we have known that historically we've seen that retention and completion can sometimes be problematic in the online modality. And although that has begun to change over the years as the quality has advanced, we know that their online courses have had higher failed retention rates, and online classes can have a higher drop rate. So I think, from an equity perspective, we need to kind of embrace this and look at, what are some of the reasons for this? So if you would go to the next slide, please. So the reasons for this, there are many interrelated factors. One of them is from the institutional perspective and the things that institution can do to be able to improve and support and embrace equity. And that's really, I think, the reason why we're all here today. But I think it's important to also notice that there are also personal and circumstantial reasons why this is an issue. So I think it's important to think about the students who enroll in online education, enroll for particular reasons to be able to increase their flexibility to access it, but it's because they come from contexts which make traditional campus-based education very challenging for them, right? They may be working adults, they may have, they may be caregivers, they just may have extraordinarily busy lives with commitments outside of education, and so they turn to online as an option for that. Well, when you do the studies about why students drop, often the contextual reasons are the same reasons. So the same reasons they select online are the same reasons that they may drop those classes, because their lives are very complex and they aren't able to manage it. So it's important to kind of have that context as we think about how we approach equity. Next slide, please. But from an institutional perspective, we have some tools, right? We have some things that we can do to improve that situation for online students. And so we can focus on what we're doing for course delivery, for the technology resources we provide, the way that we are supporting online students, and of course, course design. So I think, we'll pick up on some of these as we go through our conversation today. Next slide. So speaking of quality, I think, as I said, we are making strides in improving quality in online education. And it's because there's some very explicit actions being taken by institutions to be able to improve it. And so this Chloe question was really about what institutions are doing in different modalities in terms of quality assurance. And the obvious, the thing that leaps right off the page, is that for online asynchronous courses, you can see that requirements are different than for face-to-face courses. That for online asynchronous courses, fully 50% of respondents say their courses must meet quality standards. And then there's some optional compliance by program department and by faculty, but a full 50%. For face-to-face courses, that same measure is 13%. So you can see that institutions have begun to put processes and quality assurance protocols in place around the courses that are using technology, and especially online asynchronous courses. Next slide, please. And so we asked the chief online officers about what they're doing with quality and how they're talking about it. And so what we've seen is, on the right, you see the green circles. Those are all the percentage of online officers who are saying they practice these things in their institutions. So to provide reliable tech support for students, to be providing quality online teaching and the quality practices around that, quality benchmarks or standards for online courses and programs, and then academic support. But if you, and this isn't a question about how well they're doing these things, but just that they're doing those things. And then the black and the blue circles are really about who are they telling that they're doing these things. And so you see many fewer saying that they communicated to students, and fewer still that they're using it to recruit. So it is not front and center in how institutions are presenting themselves, but work is progressing to improve quality and to ensure that students have a equitable and quality experience with online. Next slide. And this is just one example of an emerging trend that we are watching and beginning to be involved with, and this is course sharing. So because student demand is increasing, and as you know, unfortunately, we've all seen that institutions themselves have been merging and downsizing and essentially may lack the capacity to serve that increasing demand from students. What we've seen is more and more institutions collaborating together in a course sharing context. And so this is an opportunity for institutions to help their students persist and complete by collaborating with other organizations, teaching institutions who have room in the courses that they're teaching for their students. And so the course sharing can happen with a third-party platform like Acadium, or it could happen within systems. And we're seeing examples of this happening across the US, and this is growing. But it's actually an important tool for institutions to ensure that their students can get the courses they need when they need them, get them transcripted as the appropriate kind of credit on their home institution transcript, and be able to complete the degree program on time. So it's an interesting collaboration, because in a way it's third-party provision of education, but it's accredited institutions supporting accredited institutions. So can we go to the next slide, please? And this is just to say, this is also an area that Quality Matters has stepped into in terms of making sure that the teaching institutions are providing a robust learning experience for the students that they'll teach that are coming from other institutions. So the elements of that, well, that's quality courses aligned to standards, that's prepared and credentialed instructors, and supported instructors. So it should be very, very familiar things to all of you listening here. But it's a way for us to be able to step in and take a very student-centered look at those things within the institutions. So I'm going to stop there. I think that's oh no, I have one more slide. So another, the final slide here comes from Chloe again, and this is about artificial intelligence. And we did ask a number of questions about artificial intelligence in the Chloe report, but I pulled this one because it's more of a summary slide about what the uses that of AI in higher education. And I mean, you can look at this with different lenses. So you can look at the orange here that says these there's little or no extent of these uses, right? So that's sort of the majority response here. But I think the fact that you see a lot of variation on by department and by program kind of reflects the fact that institutions are doing a lot of experimentation, and the fact that we have great or moderate extent for all of these uses to some extent, right, are showing that institutions are moving forward and looking at how AI can be used in instruction. And I would say, you know, the adaptive, as you go down this list, like feedback on student work and performance and adaptive and personalized learning pathways, these could be areas where AI can contribute the most potentially to equitable learning experiences, but they're also the most complex to do well. So I think it will take time for us to be able to move forward in those ways for equitable instruction. But I think this just indicates that we're all still learning, and we're still learning together about appropriate uses of AI. So I think Meg probably has more to say on that.
Great. Thanks so much, Deb, for that startup for this. I'm going to follow up a little bit on Deb's identifying the issue of AI, because I think even those statistics that Chloe shared do show that there's limited sort of predominant conversations in these areas across the institution. I think we're finding this year in the the conversations about AI, that they're becoming more institutionally centered. For example, my provost here at Empire State University, who's on the call here today, just sponsored a week-long AI Institute for faculty with lots of work and presenters from the students, so that the conversation is bubbling up, as well as being initiated by provosts across the country. And I think there's an important linkage to equity, as Deb just indicated. Some of these AI tools, the conversation could be directed not only to the issues related to the AI and the technology, but also to the ways that they can be used to improve equity and inclusion. And I think that makes it a much more comfortable conversation for faculty, because it identifies a way that these are not just flash in the pan. These are things that can actively help us as we move forward. So I think we should keep an open mind. There are two recent reports that I'm sharing in the chat and we'll share on our resource slide. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, multiple countries project, has released a report on equity and inclusion and AI. The Online Learning Consortium also worked with historically Black institution HBCUs and are looking particularly at AI in the use of working with students who come from minoritized backgrounds. And, these reports are particularly interesting. I think the Online Learning Consortium report is interesting because, as many of you know, the HBCUs, promote the participation of individuals into technology fields who have not historically been in those fields. So the use of AI in those institutions, I think, could have potentially great impact on the career pathways of diverse students, and particularly maybe students who have been underserved by some of our institutions. And I also think the OECD report helps to lay out for us some of the issues as we think about AI. And this slide, I'm just showing that when we look at inclusion, beyond equity, we're really talking about using tools that not just to promote the access to the technology or the tool that someone has, but really using the tools to promote participation in higher education in a different way. So like Deb, I'm interested in following adaptive learning. It can be expensive for institutions and it can require centralized support from technology staff and academic leaders, but it does have the potential to personalizing the opportunities for different groups of students in ways they might be better able to learn. I also think that AI has the potential to increase a sense of belonging and a sense of well-being for students in creating a communication loophole that supports what the professors and other instructors can do in the classroom. Next slide, Rebecca. So, we're looking at the various tools. We know there are some that put the learner in the control seat, some tools to personalize and allow the learner to use the technology when and how they want to, such as, some learners prefer the use of intelligent tutoring systems that might adapt what they do. Simulations can help a learner understand a particularly difficult concept, and it can also be used to make learning more accessible for students who might not be able to use the materials as we present them. But then there are also faculty-led tools in AI, and as long as these are designed in inclusive ways, we can use AI-powered robots. We can use ways to assist with assessment and online course management. And I've watched institutions particularly look at adding coaching capabilities to their AI portfolios. And of course, there are other institutional ways we're using AI at our institutions, and that can come from anywhere in, the admissions cycle, in the cycle for learning support, to help us to use predictive analytics so that we can use more data-informed decision-making about the tools that we are selecting. And Rebecca, one more slide on AI, and then we'll finish up with this topic. I think, we're summarizing here that this is still this earlier stage on AI. It reminds me of when we were early adopting online education, when we were looking at the fact that there were affordances and there were challenges. And I've listed a couple of the affordances on the previous slide, but we are still looking at issues of accessibility and the cost of some of the tools. And some of the tools, as we know, do present bias. And we definitely don't want to add that to our portfolio. And there are some concerns about the fact that does AI appropriately provide the social and emotional dimensions that we need overall? So we'll finish up this conversation about AI again fairly early on that, but we did get some questions in the preliminary ask for questions. So I'll hand it over to Ryan.
Yeah, I think we'll pause right now and just take a brief break to see if there are any questions or thoughts in the chat so far. Judy, did we get any questions so far?
We did. Deb, during your presentation, a couple questions came in for your slides. One, are the participants who responded to the Chloe survey, are they instructional designers, and are they certified by Quality Matters?
So I say generally neither. So these are individuals who have the role or have the job duties as the Chief Online Learning Officer for their institution. They're not all from QM institutions. They're just across the US. And we've been hard at work trying to gather those names. It's not as easy as you'd think because they're not all identified as such. It'd be nice if everybody just had the title Chief Online Officer, and it would be easy for us to find them. But the person who's really responsible for online at that institution can vary. But that's who responds, and it's only one response per institution because of that.
And another question, this one was posed again, Deb, during your slides, referencing one of your slides. Has data been disaggregated to understand if there are different preference modalities for traditional age students compared to adult learners?
So not in the Chloe surveys because we didn't ask it that way. And I'm not sure institutions could really provide the data that way. And I'm not sure it's all that meaningful because I think, one of the things I try to advocate for is, rather than compare campus-based to online students, because it's becoming more and more blurred, you think about what your profile of students are. And if the profile of the students are different in online versus on campus, then you can measure within that profile if there are differences by sort of our traditional demographics, right? But like I said at the beginning, the reason why students gravitate to online is often because of the context that they're in, and that creates different needs and different priorities for those students. So it's important to when you want to compare, you compare apples to apples. So actually, what we're seeing is, if I don't know about the breaking down into different demographic groups, but and some institutions may be doing that, I should say that. But I think what we're seeing is just more students on campus are desiring to take more online courses. And so I think that's what we see when we see the online sections of courses filling up fastest, right? The quickest. And I don't know if Meg wants to respond to that question at all or not.
Yeah, I would just agree with Deb that you know, I think from even a middle states perspective on quality and looking at how we define who our students on, you know, I've heard from the staff and others that what we look at is who are we trying to serve and how do we assess, you know, what quality that we're looking at, what data we're looking at, and can we, when we're doing the kind of survey that Deb talked about, you know, take those results, bring them back to our own institutions and think about who we're trying to serve. And are we assessing, you know, what we're doing at the institution for those particular populations that may be different in the online or blended or face-to-face classroom.
All right, and there's one more question before we move on. Can you tell us how you defined hybrid learning?
Is this relevant to how it was defined in the Chloe surveys, or?
I think the question is in reference to the Chloe surveys. It's not clarified there. The answer is yes. He's quick on the answer there. Thank you, Rick.
Yeah, I think it's whether it has the learning consists of both, you know, on-campus time and uh, online learning. So it has elements of both.
All right, thank you. I think we're going to turn it over to Ryan to pose some additional questions to the presenters.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Judy. Actually, we're going to go back to the slides right now, and then we'll get back to those additional questions later. But thank you so much, Judy. So if we could just bring the slides back up, and we're going to go back over to Meg. Thank you.
Sure. So Deb and I, in thinking about this panel, one of the things that we wanted to present, in addition to Deb's main point that equity and quality go hand in hand, is also that equity and quality start at the institutional level. And, you know, all the work that we can do with faculty to improve quality at the course level needs to be embedded in a strategy for quality and inclusion in the academic program. And one of, my main premises is that we need to quit thinking about academic affairs as one silo, institutional research as another silo, and student affairs, academic support as one silo. That we really need to work together at the institutional level to support faculty in the delivery of an instruction. And one report that I pulled out and am sharing in the chat is from a project called Every Learner Everywhere, which is a consortium of 12 professional societies, including groups like Achieving the Dream, WCET, the Online Learning Consortium, many groups, also academic affairs groups like the Chief Academic Officers and APLU. And this is a report by Tanya Houston out in Milwaukee that talks about how we could look at equity at an institutional lens and how we can think about blending our institution, not just, having blended or hybrid or, not just looking at the modalities for learning, but look at how we deliver for the entire university. And in this report, they have some clear areas of focus. One is, an area that Deb already mentioned, which is, a clean focus on students. What are they coming to us to consider. You know, are they looking for degrees? Are they looking for certificates? Are they looking for micro-credentials? And how do we help them to move to their goals? We do know that students are very career focused. You know, they have, you know, very, very interested in career success. And particularly when you look at an equity lens, the parents, the students, the adult students who come from a background that hasn't historically been supported as well by higher education are looking at ways that we can acknowledge these external issues that put pressure on the completion of their learning goals. So I think when we think about quality and inclusion, we can look at a number of ways. We can look at learning personalization. How do we look at the entire institution to bring forward student success and academic classroom success? We're looking at improved outcomes. We look to give, you know, a strong instructor presence and faculty present in whatever modality we're choosing. And as we know in the online education world, that strong instructor presence, whether it be within the classroom itself or within the program or within the larger institution, the student needs to feel a sense of belonging. And we need to look at ways at assessing constantly the quality of what we do in those areas. We'll move to the next slide, please. We do know that there are numerous ways that institutions assess quality. And we have tools, Quality Matters that Deb just talked about is one tool that can be used to instruct, you know, to help institutions to improve the quality of instruction at the institution. And what I really like about it, it's a very strong peer review environment, which I think is particularly successful with faculty. This is another survey that is focused directly on equity in distance learning, a survey that was done as a part of that Every Learner Everywhere project. Now, I don't think the survey is perfect, but I do think it lends ourselves to some questions that we can ask ourselves. And one thing I do like about this survey itself is it brings in the learner's external environment and helps the faculty member to understand where it is the student is coming from. So it asks questions, for example, like, do you have a quiet, safe place to study? Or do you have the right resources you need? Are you able to purchase the books? Those kind of questions that I think helps the faculty understand the reality of the student's lived life. We'll move to the next slide. Another resource that I thought I would share, I'm sure some of us in the room might know about this, but there's an effort called the DEI Collaborative, which is looking at tips for faculty to design resources in the classroom for the online or blended environment. They've developed 20 DEI practices developed by teams of faculty, instructional designers, DEI experts, faculty. It's been coordinated by a number of faculty and instructional designers in California and New York. SUNY's involved with this project, and these practices are set to go live this year. The next slide tells a little bit about some of these practices, and I don't expect you, of course, to read this, but that the, you know, what the people in this project have looked at is how can we communicate better with learning management systems? You know, we enjoy good use of our learning management systems, but they could work better with accessibility. They could provide us with greater diverse imaging. They could allow us as faculty more flexibility to have ungrading or unbiased grading procedures. And sometimes I think we have to push our technology tools to better serve the students that we want to serve as higher education providers. The next slide just gives you an idea of some of the tools and tips that the DEI collaborative is doing. You know, they're going beyond, you know, let's just, you know, improve the imaging, you know, in your courses to make it more diverse, into areas where we look more strongly at the social and cultural identities of our students. And I'll move to the next slide. I just want to mention, as I'm a former OLC president, there are tools of scorecards that are available for you to do self-assessments at your institutions. I'm particularly more familiar with the student services area, but these scorecards can allow you to do peer review on administrative services, on student services, and at the course level review to use the Oscar rubric. And one of the things that I found interesting was in the most recent update of all of these three scorecards, there was a greater emphasis on equity and inclusion. And then finally, we just have our some of our references and contact information. And so I think we'll just move straight back to Brian.
Thank you so much, Meg. I'm just going to helpful reminder here. If you do have a question, just use the Zoom toolbar and you can enter your questions into the chat. I have some questions for our panelists. So if we could bring down the slides. So as a former provost and professor, I know many of our participants are probably wondering, you know, are there, what kinds of practical strategies are there to enhance quality of instruction in our various teaching modalities? And I'm sure one of those first practicalities is, how do those align with our Middle States accreditation standards? So Deb, I was curious how we might look at quality matters practices as aligning with Middle States standards.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. It takes me a little time to get off mute, so I'm sure at some point you're to tell me you're on mute, but we haven't done it yet. So I would say, so of course, quality of instruction is largely about course design and course delivery or teaching. And that's regardless of modality, right? So, so I see this as directly related to Middle States Standard 3. And it's an area QM has long focused on, although we do offer guidance and program level certification for student support, in addition to, you know, our focus on program design and teaching support. Although we are best known for our course level focus on supporting and ensuring quality in digital learning. And I think hopefully we'll have an opportunity later in our talk today, our panel today, to talk about the actual evidence expectations that Middle States has identified, which I think are excellent. And I think there are uses of QM standards and processes that can actually produce or demonstrate some of that evidence. But right now, I just want to sort of make the general point that just having standards isn't going to be enough. You know, we in QM, we always talk about standards being like a puppy, right? They're so full of promise and everybody, you know, can see the relevance of them and wants them, but there takes a lot of work to actually apply those standards so that you're going to get the quality outcome that you really want to see. So it is about your internal quality assurance processes to see those standards actually applied consistently and effectively across all of your courses, right? Are you training people to do that design and review well with the standards, providing oversight, feedback loops. And so those are the things that we're promoting and looking for, because having the standards isn't enough. You have to have an effective way to apply them. And I know these are things that middle states is looking for evidence about, right? So, you know, and I think you can use some practical tools on campus to help you do those things, to help you actually give you shortcuts to implementation. I mean, you could use course templates, which can be controversial sometimes for faculty, but actually it's a real assist to help make sure those courses are consistent for students, because that's what we're talking about, right? Is making that learning experience effective for students and having consistency and structure across the different courses they will take is important. And for teaching, it's important for faculty to have actual pedagogical training that's appropriate to the modalities that they will teach. Some of the things Meg was talking about with like instructor presence and you know, how to engage students, how to facilitate interaction, how to support active learning, and the importance of giving prompt feedback. Those are all things that are important in any modality, but particularly important in the online modality, and particularly important for students who may be coming into education disadvantaged with the skills and experiences that they bring with them to be able to succeed in this kind of modality. So I'll stop there. And
Thanks, Deb. No, that's a great answer. And it almost, as you said, it almost has a doubling effect, both online and, you know, for students who are in the online modality who have specific needs. You know, there's just more reason to introduce those practical strategies. So thank you so much, Deb. You know, we want to examine how prioritizing quality and equity in instructional design and delivery can really transform our student experience and foster student success. So I just want to ask, maybe we'll go over to Meg. What have you seen as some of the biggest challenges students face that impact their success in online modalities?
So it's interesting, Ryan. You know, I think when we, you know, I started this, my part of the presentation about the fact that we need institutional strategies. And I think sometimes as institutions, we hear anecdotes rather than collecting data. And so I think it's important for us to understand and collect data from our lived student experience about why they might be having particular challenges and what helps them to be successful. And we need to be cognizant of projects that are happening at our institutions that have promise, and replicating those projects of course improvement. I think we in higher education sometimes have, you know, a little view of, you know, this is my project and I'm working on, you know, college writing and we're improving college writing. But if we can learn how to improve college writing in also and in improving college math at the same time, you know, it brings a different perspective. So you know, what I'm looking for is how do we as institutions learn from small projects, move them into bigger projects that allow us to collect data and to make sure they're working.
Makes a lot of sense. Deb, did you also, what are some of the biggest challenges students face that impact their success in online modalities? Did you have thoughts about that as well?
I'll just name one in particular, which is their lack of readiness for the online modality. And I don't mean that from they don't know how to use the technology perspective, but I mean, you know, understanding what's going to be expected of them, and you know, in general, right, in terms of what the instructor wants to see with them, how to interact with other students, how to navigate the platform, where to find things. And so it's I used to teach a long time ago, the first class in a graduate program for business. And it was a double credit course. It was a 6 credit course, and it was for working adults coming back. And for many of them, it was the first time they'd ever taken an online course. And so we had to spend some time at the beginning really trying to level set for them, and try to understand what their expectations were, and kind of level set what my expectations were, and to deal with their emotions about it too. So I think I would capture all of that idea in this sort of lack of readiness or preparedness for what they're going to experience in online.
Yeah, and Deb, I might follow up with that a little bit and urge, as faculty, what we can do about that. And I think there has been research that has been done, particularly with groups of first generation learners, those who are not prepared. I know we're all trying to not look at it as a deficit perspective, but to look at it as what are we as institutions responsible for explaining. And there have been studies done that have shown that when the instructor themselves very clearly outlines expectations for assessment, expectation for participation, that there's greater success of all students. And in particular, there is improved success for students who come from a background where they're not sure. We can't just assume that people understand what the requirements of faculty are, even as graduate students, as Deb has indicated, but particularly for undergraduate students.
That's right. Thank you so much for those answers. I appreciate that as well, Meg. I know a lot of our participants are also interested in the assessment of the effectiveness of current instructional practices. I was hoping maybe both of you could sort of best describe some of the practices for assessment of equality and equity in instruction. So we'll start with you, Meg, if you don't mind.
Sure. And we're talking about, in this presentation, I know there are many people here from different areas, both instructional practices, but also institutional practices like student affairs and other areas. So I'll just mention one quick study that we did in the SUNY system, where we were wondering why why some of our employees in the institutions were choosing for-profit institutions versus the public higher education system in New York, which, doing competitive analysis. So part of looking at quality is looking at your competitors and what do they do. So we held a student panel where we had, 5 graduate and undergraduate students who were employees of the university who could have gotten a free education from SUNY, but instead chose to pursue a for-profit institution, which is fine. They can make that choice. That's their benefit. But we wanted to know more about why they were making that choice. And really, the quality question was about that front-end service that the institutions were providing for learning more about books, for learning more about how to register, for helping students who might not have been familiar, rather than having the view, hey, it's the student's responsibility to figure all this stuff out. We have to assist today's college students. So that was an important lesson learned for us about the front end services of our university. So, what I would say is let's look at interviewing our students, asking them, what they're looking for. Let's look at benchmarking with institutions who might be doing some aspects of what we need to do better. I am sure there are many, many aspects that we do better at SUNY, but looking at some of those front end services was really important to us.
Thank you so much, Meg. I'll ask the same question to Deb. If any best practices for assessment for quality and equity, yeah, both in instruction and institutionally, if you have responses on that side as well.
Yeah, so I would be remiss not to say, this is one of the things that QM tries to promote and provide are tools to do that kind of assessment at the course level and at the program level, and dabbling in the we've provided criteria for the teaching institutions, which is institutionally, but still focused on the teaching and learning piece of it. But honestly, if you were to say what really the best practice is, it isn't just doing those evaluations and then fixing the courses. It's putting in place this continuous improvement loop. So you're going back and you're looking at the results of that evaluation, not just as to fix the course or the program, but about your overall processes and what is that telling you about what you're doing at the institution, and are there other things that you could be doing. So you're taking the data that comes from the assessment and you're using it sort of in a feedback loop, a double feedback loop, even to not even question the goals that you're setting or the approaches that you're using, right? Because there's such an opportunity there. You're already doing the work to do the assessment. Take what you're learning and have a broader conversation on campus about what that really means in terms of how you're serving students.
That's great. Thank you so much, both of you. So moving on, we had talked in the beginning a little bit about Middle States alignment. And I kind of want to dive just a little deeper on that. So our criteria within standards 3, 4, and 5, those would be kind of the sweet spot for where we might be thinking about where these practices would lend themselves to quality and equity based improvements. And Deb, you spoke a little bit about standard 3 already. Meg, with regards to perhaps standards 4 and 5, how might you address that?
Great, thank you so much. I know we're going to talk a little bit about disaggregating data at a later point, but I think what's important in criteria 4 are, looking at, are students prepared? Do they have the basic skills, and how do we move forward? And how do we as an institution look at student achievement data in a way that is showing careful analysis and improvement moving forward? So as we talked a little bit earlier, defining who our people are that we're trying to serve, and are they adult students in the online learning environment? Are they traditional age students in the blended or face-to-face? And can we aggregate and disaggregate our data to look at things like course completion, to look at every level, program to degree continuance? And I know we've been watching projects at, across the country that look at issues of transferability. And, are we causing students to replicate courses that they shouldn't have to be taking over again? I think in New York State, for example, we do a pretty good job at working between the community colleges and the comprehensive institutions and the research institutions to look at issues of student success from the community college to the comprehensive institutions, and are those students succeeding? So I think there are ways to track on those criteria that we define as institutions. What's important, what are we looking forward to in our graduates, and how do we move that forward? So having, very, very clear information for that student achievement data, I think, is important.
That's great. Thank you so much, Meg. Meg, I'm going to stay with you and we're going to come back. I know our participants are always very eager to hear some practical advice. So just curious if you could describe some of the practical strategies that enhance the quality of instruction in online and blended modalities.
Sure. And I'll mention one project at my own institution here at Empire State University. And I think it's a good example where you take a deliberate approach. And I've seen this happen at places like Arizona State University, Central Florida, other large, online programs. But if we look at our gateway courses, and we've done this, through supported research over the years. But if you look at courses where students sometimes struggle, the science, the math, the gateway statistics courses, and if we can partner with faculty, so not make it a blame game, hey, your completion rates are 60% and the average completion rate is 70%, you got to fix this, Joe. What this is about is let's look at those courses in our program in partnership with the math department and identify those gateway courses and bring institutional resources to bear. So bring in an institutional team, have a librarian, have somebody in the math lab, have the instructional designer and the course instructors in that particular area, and also the institutional researchers, because they can bring the data and can watch if you invest the energy in improving a course overall. So we've done that with about 5 to 10 courses every year to just concentrate efforts on those particular courses to improve course completion, to improve identifying students who might need to move to a different major, to just improve the effectiveness of the particular course. And these courses have allowed us to see significant improvements, not only in course completion, but also an increased retention of students overall. And it's really grand to watch a excellent librarian, an excellent instructional designer, excellent faculty, excellent academic support people learn from each other. The faculty member says, oh, I didn't know that students were struggling with that assignment. Thank you so much for helping me to clarify those instructions. So that's been a really successful project.
Hey, that's wonderful. That's great. I love that collaboration. And Deb, I'll just turn that same kind of question over to you. And I see that you shared some resource with us as well.
Yes, we just popped that in the chat. We had a white paper on inclusion and representation, and within it you could find some not just a theoretical approach, but some ideas about like what does this actually look like in practice. But I want to double down on what Meg was just saying with this idea of it takes a village. QM's Director of Innovation and Research, Dr. Bethany Simonich, has developed a model. Really, it's a landscape of the institutional context for doing this kind of work. Any kind of really a change initiative around teaching and learning, in particular, because it isn't just about the faculty. It isn't just about the instructional designers. It's about how you have to navigate across the people and the processes and the policies and the evaluation systems, and to make this actually work, to implement any kind of initiative to be able to improve practice. The way you communicate in your communication systems. And so I'm sorry I don't have, I didn't come prepared to share that with you today, but there will be a white paper forthcoming on it. But it's essential what Meg was talking about, really, where you're going to get the biggest value and where you're not going to have people feel like it's their sole responsibility to address, is with this sort of collaborative partnership approach within the institution.
Well, that's great. Thanks, Deb. And we look forward to seeing that at some point. Appreciate that very much. Um, Sort of thinking about equitable design, sort of leveling the playing field for our historically underserved student populations. How do we see this equitable design really helping in that pursuit that so many of our institutions are after right now? We'll start with you, Meg.
So I might add another practical example to talk about equitable design. Um, I think we all have known in equitable design that, we need to change the visual imagery of our courses and what we do. And, we've had projects with gifted instructional designers helping us do that. But one institution that I saw, and I can't mention the name because I did a Middle States team review with them, and I don't want to reveal confidential information. But one institution that I worked with did such a fantastic job of thinking instead of just about imagery. They thought about, what are the careers that our students that we care about on the full spectrum of employability, where their jobs are going to be, what communities are they going to live in or return to, and did a very thorough analysis of their students. And then in the terms of equitable design, they invested in some technical staff who came with, professional level TV and video type skills to talk to our instructional designers about how do we prepare materials for students that are game-based, that are visually exciting, and not static pictures. And this institution, was very clear about knowing that they would use inner city images. They weren't using images that weren't familiar to the students overall. And they definitely were able to show, a course improvement, like their videos. It used to be that students stopped watching, about 2 minutes into the video. And then when they invested in this project and used videos, they found that were high quality produced, short, tight, relevant to the learners that they were trying to serve, that the students actually watched the videos that they were preparing for them. So when you look at, equitable instruction, I think we go back to the point that Deb made. It's all about, it improves quality for everybody. If we can't get students to review the materials that instructors prepare, then they're not going to learn from those materials. So we need to get ways to improve our resources that promote equitable design, but also then promote success for all students and good quality.
Thanks so much, Megan. What a great example and really highlighting why representation is so important. So thank you for sharing that. Deb, same question over to you about sort of this leveling the playing field.
Yeah, so I'll answer that, but then I want to piggyback on something Meg just said. So part of this is really thinking about the students that you have in your course. For some of them, what you provide in your course and your interaction with them and the linkages you make available to them are their only resource in doing this. Other students will come with experiences and other support systems and resources. So you have to think about this from the perspective of if there's nowhere else the student can go to find out this information, right? That you need to provide the transparency around this. And it does help everybody, it's, right? Because everything is there now in the course, all of the linkages to the supports that they need, all of the articulation of all of the expectations. So again, it's, and how to access the instructor, and what's okay to say to the instructor, and how do you interact with them? You have to say those things. You have to be specific, right? And it relieves, it's not only makes the student more successful, but it also relieves a lot of stress in, sort of this fear of the unknown, because for some, like the students I taught, it was the first time for them back to school in 20 years. And, they had things were very different. They didn't know they could learn. They were like, I think some of them said, like, I don't know that I can learn anything anymore. So being able to provide that pathway to them is important. But I also wanted to give another example to what Meg said about how to think about designing and what you're doing in the design of the course. Representation is really important, but there are also some simple things. It could be the scheduling and the pacing of the course could be adjusted depending on who the students are that you're serving. And I had two quick examples. One was an institution that served a lot of very rural students in a farming community, right? So there were times of the year where it was an all hands on deck thing for, at the farm, right? And they could not attend, right? So scheduling when assignment due dates and when things happen, knowing that there may be chunks of time, then your very rural students cannot necessarily make turn in an assignment every Friday, right? So thinking about like who your students are, even from a perspective of scheduling. And I had another example in a nursing program that it seems so simple, but they were having a problem with nurses passing a particular exam that was proctored on campus, but it was an online course. And they couldn't figure out why were they having such dismal rates. And they found out that it was the fact that they were scheduling this in a very short window of time. And these were working adults who are working in the medical field and were getting off shift work. And they couldn't get there in time, right, to make that window of time. They didn't know that until they actually did a survey of their students. And it was because they did an assessment of how well they were doing as an institution serving these students. They saw big failure rates and they addressed it. So sometimes it's simple, right? And we have to think about all of the things that can serve our students.
Yeah, sometimes it is. Thank you so much, Deb. Appreciate that. I think I'm going to just have one last question before we turn it over to our participants' questions. So I was wondering if you could discuss the importance of disaggregating data to identify and target improvements for at-risk populations in online modalities. So we'll start with you, Meg.
I think, again, this is a campus-wide project of defining who your students are. As we talked about earlier, working with a good institutional research function. But I think what I've watched at institutions that are successful at this is that they engage the community in this conversation, that they bring together faculty and student support staff right at the front end when you're defining who the populations are, and can you actually pool data in a way that is meaningful to solve the problems that staff have often already identified. That the staff or the faculty have an inclination that there's a service standard that's not being met, or that particular groups of students are, compassionate faculty are already aware that there are some students who are failing that they'd like to support. So if you can define the data that can support your staff and faculty in solving the problems and bringing resources to help them to do that. And, I think from a quality point of view is, what you do with that data. Deb mentioned it earlier, having a continuous improvement plan and documenting that continuous improvement plan, celebrating the results, when you improve at the institution and are more successful with students. I think it really is a very important area for us all to work on.
Thanks. And Deb, I'll ask the same question over to you about disaggregating data and the importance for identifying and targeting improvements for at-risk populations.
Yeah. I'd like to answer that, but I can't improve over what Meg just said.
That's good.
Yeah, she's right on the nose. Yeah, I can't. There's nothing I can add to that.
That's fair. I'll just add one thing. I know that, I think a lot of our institutions, much of this stems and it flows from who they are, what your mission is, what are your strategic goals and priorities. And I think, we have great diversity amongst our institutions here at Middle States, some large, some small, private, for-profit, public. And I think the way that we approach these questions is really about who we serve. And, when we're thinking about the populations that we're really targeting and we're thinking about and we're looking at, and that can also change over time. Our priorities can be aspirational. So perhaps there's a group or a population of students we want to serve better who we haven't served as well in the past. So I would just like to sort of conclude that, we also have to be looking back into standards 1 as well. So let me see if I can land one more question before we get into the Q&A portion. What do we consider the best practices for working with our with OPMs? I know it's not something we talked a lot about today, but I just kind of wanted to hear what maybe either of your thoughts might be on that. So we'll start with Meg.
Sure. I was hoping to hand this one off to Deb. No, I think in relation to the topics we've been considering today is in selecting OPMs or third-party providers of any sort, I think it's important for us to be able to get access to data. And, if we can't get what we need from this in system of the partner that we have, then we can't do our job. So, my best advice would be, right at the get-go when working with either, an OPM or a tutoring system, or any group, that you be very clear, particularly now that, Middle States is asking us to look at disaggregated data. There hasn't necessarily been a history of having access to that kind of specific data. So I think we need to be asking those questions in advance.
Thank you, Meg. Deb, did you have thoughts on that as well? Best practices?
Just very quickly, it's just for the institution to genuinely retain full oversight. We asked questions and Chloe about OPMs and their uses, and they're not really going away, the use, and maybe it's there's some change going on. I think it's critical though that you realize full on, and you create your oversight processes around this, that they're your students and you retain full responsibility for everything that happens to them and the quality of their experiences, right? And so you have to kind of structure the oversight you do, looking at the data that Meg was talking about, to make sure that you can do due diligence with that.
Thank you so much. And yeah, and I'll just remind our participants today, our standards, we cover, working with third-party providers. We have procedures and policies separate from that you can find on our Middle States website. But in each of those standards, we're looking to know that the institution is reviewing and approving the services that have been designed and delivered for their students. So this is a really important aspect. So I appreciate both those answers as well. So before we run out of time, I want to make sure we have time to answer all of our questions we're receiving in the chat. So Judy, I'll turn it back over to you to see what questions we might have.
Sure, and I think now might just be a really good time to piggyback on that third-party provider piece because there are a lot of questions around that. And just as a reminder, the commission is concerned with arrangements with third-party providers that include, but are not limited to, that delivery of student learning opportunities. We've talked a lot about that today, but also student support services and services for the assessment of student learning. And it's also important especially when we're talking about online program managers, those OPMs, to remember that some third-party provider arrangements also require substantive change approval. And that does include OPMs when they deliver 25% or more of instruction. So I'll stop there since this isn't a third-party provider's webinar, but I will remind the participants that, Deb mentioned the Commission's evidence expectations guidelines early in our session, and they do have some very specific guidelines for the types of evidence to provide around third-party providers. So we just want to remind everybody to take a look there. All right, so let's go into some of the questions that have come in. Here's one. For fully online asynchronous programs that are taught mostly by adjunct instructors, do you recommend having pre-made locked courses that don't require development? Or should courses be set up for faculty to develop each term?
I'll be glad to jump in as a former online learning dean at one point, which with lots of adjunct. I would say in between. I wouldn't quite call it lockdown. I would say having a structured template that is prepared with content, activities, assessments, because the adjunct that we're hiring oftentimes because they have professional expertise in the field that they can bring to the course, but they don't have the history of instructional design and curriculum design. So I used to always have something that I called the 80-20 rule, which is 80% of the content is provided, but that you allow for flexibility for the gifted professional that you're hiring to teach the course to personalize where they can. That's my particular perspective. Deb, do you have any thoughts on that?
I would fully agree with that, to provide some opportunity for that course to be personalized by the instructor and bringing in their full selves and their particular skills and attributes for which you hired them ostensibly. I'd also advocate though for making sure you provide some kind of training about online for those adjuncts. Even if they're coming in relatively last minute, you can provide concurrent training. You have to do it realizing that their tolerance for how much of their time you're going to take in the training may be pretty low, so you have to be pretty clever about how you do that. But I think they need it. I think you need to, as a guardrail, you need to provide some kind of training.
Very good. Here's another question. There remains a certain degree of mistrust among faculty when it comes to online education. How can this be addressed?
Well, can I just give something that we have observed for the 20 plus years QM has been doing this. And sure, we have training for how to teach online, but really when we do the training for faculty on the standards and why and what that, and how to think about it, regardless of where we're doing it, whether it's in the US or internationally, there's this little light bulb moment for faculty who haven't really taught online or haven't done it very much, because it requires you to have a different kind of mindset and discipline about taking that student perspective, right? And it really, this whole idea of aligning it so what you're requiring the students to do are directly related to what you said they needed to know and do in that course, right? And that becomes clear. It really kind of changes, faculty's mindset. And so I think just experience in doing this well, experience in understanding standards, having an opportunity for training for it, and then experience and maybe even guided experience in teaching can go a long way to, if it's done right, can go a long way to dispelling sort of this sense of distrust.
I think I'll add just 2 points to what I agree with everything Deb said. One area is peer-to-peer. That I think at most institutions has worked well. If you get, one solid department member, one respected senior colleague, one bright new colleague, peer-to-peer pressure, peer-to-peer collaboration, any opportunities like that really help to get rid of the distrust. A second area that I would talk about is linking it to other institutional goals, particularly the topic of today's seminar, diversity and inclusion. I mean, faculty are in this area because they want to impact students' lives. So, if they want to reach students, today's students, many of whom might not be able to, come to our traditional classroom environments, it's part of their goal to reach a broader audience. So if we can link it to other goals like the diversity and inclusion, like increasing access, I think faculty are compassionate about those topics.
Great, and I think we have time to squeeze in one more question. What metrics are typically disaggregated in terms of program level student learning outcomes? And this question is specifically referencing our standards, our own Middle States Commission standards, Standard 5. So I'll start with just a reminder that with all standards, Middle States does ask you to look at the evidence and the work that you're doing in terms of demonstrating compliance, that you look at it through the lens of your own mission. So we would want to remind everyone that we're not going to prescribe the types of metrics that you disaggregate. We want them to be specific to whether it's an institutional priority for your own self-study, whether it's an area of focus in terms of looking at a specific underserved student population, but all of that should relate to your mission from a commission standpoint. But going back to the question about what are some of those that are typically disaggregated, I think for institutions that might just be starting on this particular path, perhaps we can provide some advice.
An area, and I haven't seen exactly this example on campuses, but I've thought about it. An effort of many institutions to look at first generation students and identifying, if that's a focus of you're a large university and it's a first emphasis on that, looking at figuring out ways to disaggregate that data to show that the programs that you're offering to those students have impact, and are they helping in that area? I know that institutions have historically looked at things like Pell eligible students, as a category, and can we better serve in some way that particular student. So, again, I would just second what Judy is saying. If it's an institutional priority and something that you're working on, can you figure out how to collect the data that'll help to support your improvement efforts? Because these are all linked to improving our quality.
All right, and I think that will do it for us. We have just a couple closing slides for you, if we could bring those back up on the screen. Again, we want to thank Symbiosis, who has sponsored this event and is also the 2024 Annual Conference Diamond sponsor. They will share more about their services in presentations and at the exhibit hall during this year's annual conference in December. To learn more about their services, please visit symbiosised.com. And of course, that takes us into a segue to please remember to join us December 11th through the 13th at the Philadelphia Marriott downtown for the Middle States Commission on Higher Education's 2024 annual conference. Registration is open now, and we hope to see you there. So thank you for attending today's event. To learn more about future events, please visit our website at msche.org and follow us on YouTube, LinkedIn, and X. Have a great rest of your day.